When we calculate price sensitivity, what we ideally want to find out is what the willingness to pay of the customer is. That is, how much is the customer willing to pay for a product and above which price the customer is no longer interested in buying it. This question is related to the question of how much value does the product create for the customer. Now, if we think of how much value a product creates for a customer, and we call this concept economic value created, there are three different factors that we need to consider. Assume we want to calculate what is the economic value created by an e-book, an electronic version of a book, any type of book. The first question we need to ask yourself is, what is the next best thing? So if our consumer does not buy our ebook, what other thing would the consumer buy? And we call this the competitive reference value. The competitive reference value is the value delivered by the next best thing, by the next best competitive alternative. And let's assume for our example, if the consumer wouldn't buy our ebook, they probably would buy a physical book. And assume that a physical book creates value or is currently sold at $50. The next question is, what is our positive differentiation value? What are we better at than the next best thing? The unique value delivered by our products and services above and beyond the next best thing. Well, obviously an ebook may be more convenient because you don't have to carry a heavy book around. You can keep it on an ebook reader, you can keep it on your phone. So there is an aspect of convenience. There might be other aspects as well. For example, you can automatically look up certain words that you don't understand, which may be especially helpful when you're reading a book in a foreign language. Assume all these positively differentiating factors create an incremental value of 100, or an incremental value of 50, resulting in a total use value of our product of 100. The use value is the competitive reference value plus the positive differentiation value. Now, it is likely that our product not only has positive sides compared to the next best thing, but also negative sides. For example, an ebook may be less practical if you want to impress people by having a very, very large library at home, because you can carry 1,000 ebooks on your iPad, but nobody would see whether it's 1,000 ebooks or just one. So there may also be a negative differentiation value, which is the unique cost of doing business with you, the unique cost of you buying your product. Assume this is 20. We have to take this away from the use value in order to get the economic value created by our product. And in this case, we start with 50, which is the competitive reference value. We add another 50 in terms of positive differentiation value. We take off 20 for negative differentiation value, and we end up with 80. 80 is the value created by our product. And the acceptable price range is the price that is charged for the next best thing, 50 on the lower end, and our economic value created on the upper end, which means we could charge any price between 50 and 80. The idea of the economic value estimation process or economic value estimation framework is that we need to find out how our product creates actual value for the people buying it. And for that, we need three steps. First, we need to understand the economics of our clients. How do our clients make money? Think of it in a B2B setting, for example. And how can we help them to make more money? We then need to find out how much our product is worth, how much incremental money our product can create. And based on this, we have to determine an optimal price range. Let me give you an example. All of you are currently writing your master thesis. So let's assume that in your specific master thesis, you look into startups and you try to find out how employee satisfaction is managed in startup companies. And because you're really, really interested in the topic, either because you want to sell your thesis or you want to build your own startup, you survey 200 startup companies in Europe and you find out how satisfied employees are and how long employees stay on average, like what the employee turnover is and what the relationship is between these two variables. Assume you want to sell your thesis. What price would you charge? If you think about this for a second, many of you may probably have a process where you say, well, I spend this and this many hours writing the thesis, and for each hour, I think I should earn that and that much, and multiplying the number of hours times a certain rate that you believe you should earn per hour gives you a price. This is a cost-based logic. because you're looking into how costly it was for you to produce this thesis and you try to recover your cost. But this approach doesn't make sense, because at the end of the day, nobody cares how long it took you to write this thesis. What people care about is how much value they get out of the thesis. So instead of thinking about the number of hours you spend and what you think you should earn, think of what drives the profit and loss of a startup company. And there are obviously hundreds of factors who make a startup profitable or not profitable. The business model, what type of competitive intensity it is, probably who the venture capital fund is, who is behind it, and also to some extent the employee turnover, because whenever they lose an employee, then incur cost. Now, obviously, out of all of these factors, your thesis only addresses one of these elements. Even with your thesis, the startup would not be able to get a better product and service offering or to change the competitive intensity of its industry, because that's not what you're looking at, but you're looking at the level of employee turnover. So let's understand how expensive employee turnover is. Well, when we are looking for a new person, we probably need to place an ad on LinkedIn, assume this costs $600. We may need to hire a temp employee to fill the position until we have it filled. Let's say that's $160 per day, and assume it takes us on average 12 days to recruit a person. So it's the 600 times 12 plus 12 times the 160. So whenever an employee leaves, costs us about $2,500. The current average turnover rate in a startup, let's say, is 50%. People stay on average 2 years. If a startup does whatever you recommend based on your thesis to increase employee satisfaction, we may get it up to 3 years. So we reduce from 50 to 33. Assuming an average staff of 10 and the cost of 2,520 we just calculated, this means a company has a potential benefit of about $4,200 if they do the things that you recommend in your thesis. What we did here is exactly following this process. We understand our customer economics. How do startups make money? We identify which of these factors we can actually influence, which is the employee turnover, and we try to find out how much money a company can save or earn more when they follow whatever we recommend, or in a more abstract sense, when they buy our product and service, 4,200. Which means our thesis, or your thesis, has a value creation potential of 4,200. But assume, since you are an unknown supplier, since you have never worked with the firm, you also have a negative differentiation value of 200, because we need to first get to know you and you need to set up in our supplier system first. So we have to take this away, which means the economic value created by your thesis is 4,000. And if you know that the next best thing is a market research report that looks very generally at employee satisfaction, not focused on startups, and this report is sold as 1,500, you know that you can charge anything between 1,500 and 4,000. What is important here is that you see how different this approach is to the approach that you might have taken intuitively. Nobody cares how expensive it was for you to produce this product. Nobody cares how much time you spend in your thesis. But what people care about is how much value it creates when they buy it. This is, for example, how you would price a service, how you would price a consulting service if you ever enter consulting. And it's also a very different selling process. Because instead of telling someone, well, it took me 100 days to write this thesis, and I think I should earn $50 per day, you tell them, listen, I think if you buy my thesis, you earn $4,000 more. You have an economic value rate of 4,000. So why don't we split this to some extent? You give me my price and the rest you keep for yourself. So we have a certain pie and we split the pie. It's a very, very powerful approach, especially when you're selling complex services. And it can most often be applied in B2B, because this whole question of finding out how your client earns money and generates money is more applicable in B2B, but it can also be used in B2C. This is where we end this session. And in the next session, I talk a little bit more about the different details of setting prices, the question of price differentiation, price bundling, of sales promotions. All of this will be the topic of next week.